Thank you for joining us for the Deaf Culture and Access Services episode of 2020 Family Orientation. Today, we'll not only talk about the services available to our deaf and hard of hearing population, but also about what having that population means to our campus community, including our hearing students, and what parents and students can expect to see and experience on campus. I personally am really excited for this episode. I think there are a lot of things that make RIT a unique place, but I think our deaf culture on campus is something that truly makes RIT RIT. So joining me today is Chris Campbell, who is the Technical Operations Business Analyst in Access Services, and Tim Elbert, who is the Director of Student Life Team at NTID. So before we get into the questions, I'm going to ask Chris and Tim to introduce themselves. Chris, would you like to start?
Yes, hello there. My name is Chris Campbell, and I am the business manager for the NTID Department of Access Services. And I'm an RIT graduate in 1981 and also in 1996.
And good morning, everyone. My name's Tim Albert, and I am the NTID Student Life Team Director. And I actually came to NTID in 1991 and graduated in 97.
Great, you've both been at RIT a long time. We were talking about that a little bit before we even started recording, the history that you have here. So I'm gonna go back to Chris and then to Tim again. Can you talk a little bit about what you do at RIT, what your job entails?
Well, I work with NTID. I've been there for 10 years. And I've taught NTID information computer department courses. I've also worked with the Center on Access Technology. Thank you.
I work in the Department of Access Services also, which I can talk more about later, making sure that my access and the internet services are right. In making requests for interpreters and captionists. And I make sure that they are assigned in the right area at the right time to the right people. So I work with that structure as well.
Great, and you're right, we will talk a little bit more about what that means in just a few minutes. Tim, can you tell our families a little bit about what it is you do as the Director of the Student Life Team?
Absolutely. You know, I moved to Rochester in 2017 with a new position as the Director of the Student Life Team. And hang on just one second. Okay, I thought something was coming up on my screen. So I worked as the Director. It's very challenging because we want to teach all the RIT and NTID students, you know, make sure that they have a very successful journey. And RIT students who are deaf, for example, or deaf blind, or deaf and have secondary disabilities, hard of hearing, meaning a little perhaps not as profoundly deaf. We have a wide range of people. So we have many, many different people who identify with a variety of backgrounds and cultures. And we have Alana students as well, African American, Native American, Asian American. So we have the full scope of deaf plus students here, and we want to support them on their journey in college, and we offer them support. We offer co-curricular and late evening activities and events for those students for their enjoyment. We provide all of that on campus. So Student Life Team also collaborates with different departments in order to support all of those students. And we always are very supportive of students and make referrals for them to other appropriate departments for their needs.
Great, thank you both. So we've all referenced NTID, and I just want to make sure all of our parents and family members listening know that NTID stands for the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, which is a part of our campus at RIT. And Tim, if you can just share a little bit about what NTID is and who those students are.
Yes, of course. NTID, as you said, the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, was founded in 1968, so just over 50 years. And NTID offers students degrees that get associate degrees, either AAS or AOS or AS degrees, so 2-year degrees. They also help them to improve their English, to improve all of those academic skills. And then following those degrees, they can then transfer, if they wish, to the baccalaureate level at the other colleges of RIT. So NTID has about 1,200 deaf and hard of hearing students with, again, different majors that all of them enjoy. And we also have faculty and staff who can sign as well as interpreters. So the students have a wide range of communication skills. Some of them have hearing aids, cochlear implants, some rely on lip reading, some use ASL, and NTID is one of the 9 colleges of RIT.
Great, thank you. That's a great overview to understand a little bit about what NTID is and who the students are. So can you two talk a little bit about how does having this large deaf and hard of hearing population on campus benefit the RIT community?
Well, I think that it's very helpful to the general population here in the community, because then they have an opportunity to understand the difference of, they understand what the environment might be like for their future work. And people have to learn how to communicate with people that are different from themselves. Some people sign only. So we learn how to communicate with the person who signs. Maybe we write back and forth, or we might use a text. And so it's good for people who are out there to be able to have the opportunity to interact with others who are very different from themselves.
That's great. I agree. I love what you just said about learning how to communicate with different people. And I think whether it's, you know, through ASL or different languages or different cultures, that is such a good point. And I love that you said that. Thank you. So Chris, while you're talking, I would like to talk a little bit about access services and what kind of services do we offer for deaf and hard of hearing students through access services. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. As I just mentioned, there are a lot of students who use American Sign Language here for their communication. And so we provide American Sign Language interpreters for them. But they also have the option of using captioning for people who prefer to be able to read an English text during their classes. And there are some people who maybe can't see the professor or whatever, and they can't hear well enough to be able to do everything. So then they use the captioning to help them get equal access. We also provide note takers during the class, because that way the students can just give their full attention to the class, and so they can understand the material that's being explained, instead of trying to look up, look down, and write a note, and therefore miss information. So with that way, they can give their full attention to the lecture, and then there's another person giving their full attention to writing notes. We have 130 staff interpreters here, and we also hire in, we have about 400 note takers that work every semester for us as well. And we have 55 captionists that are here.
Great. And the note takers are often student employees, correct?
Yes, they are. Normally, it's students who've already been in that class previously, and they hire them to write notes for that particular class.
Right. So I love pointing this out because this is one way that our entire community is impacted by the deaf community on campus. Is that's a job that a lot of our hearing students really like because it's going to class and helping out their classmates. So Chris, can you
Yes.
tell us about how does a student request services when they need them through Access Services?
That's a good question. If a student is deaf or hard of hearing and they need to make a request for services, then they have to go to our online site, which is called iaccess.rit.edu. And then you write in there whether you need an interpreter or a note taker. And then if the students are members who, if they're leading a club or whatever, they invite a deaf or hard of hearing person to come to their club for a meeting, then they can go to the same website and they can request for, make a request for interpreting services in general for the community.
Great, thank you. So note-taking was one example we just talked about how a hearing student can get engaged in deaf culture, but Tim, you might have some other ways, and Chris as well. How can hearing students learn about and get engaged with the deaf culture at RIT?
Well, yeah, in fact, there are many, many RIT hearing students that are not familiar with deaf culture, and they're really surprised to see students signing the first time they get to campus, and that signing is happening everywhere. It can be a little overwhelming, but we do have an RIT NSO, which is called a new student orientation, and we offer that for all first-year students who are coming to campus. And what we do is provide it's called Live and Learn Together. So it talks about deaf culture, it explains more about NTID and its history. And I would say there's about 3,000 new students that are there trying to take in all of that information. It's a good start for them to really get ready to come in to their first day of classes. So they've seen this information before they get there, and it's not as surprising to them. They've already been oriented to it. And for those that are interested in willing to learn sign, we welcome them. We have an event called No Voice Zone, and that is hosted by the RIT Center for Residence Life. So they're responsible for hosting that, NVZ, No Voice Zone. And that's every Wednesday night, and it is just full of people who have to turn off their voices for the evening. So that's a requirement, no voicing, and then they have to practice their signing. And we teach very basic signing so they can kind of learn as they go. So that's another event and activity that we offer. It gives them the chance to meet deaf and hard of hearing students and look at all the different types of communication modes that those students use, which can be a challenging and learning experience. But it gives them a way to pick things up little by little. So it's not a, here you go, here's everything you need to learn, but you kind of learn as you go. So it's another great way that hearing people can get involved with the deaf community through participation in No Voice Zone. We also have the Student Life team, which, as I said before, offers some late night events. And just as an example, we have something called Goodbye Summer, Hello Fall. And again, we draw a lot of people to that as well, very interactive. We don't have interpreters. It's just a way for people to learn how to make those short introductions in sign language and start to get to know people. And a chance for them to practice what's called their receptive skills, the way to watch signing and begin to take it in and understand it. But it's an enjoyable way to do that. Because, in the dorms, I'm sure that they're talking about, how cool is sign? I've never seen it anywhere before in my life. So again, we have a lot of different ways, different events on campus with interpreters that they can be participating, without interpreters, presentation. We also have captioning, which can be called CART. So all of those types of things are available for students on campus.
Great, that's a lot of examples, and I'm sure there's plenty more that you didn't even name of ways for students to get involved and engaged. So I would guess that some of our parents are curious about what kinds of things they will see and experience on campus that are different than they might find elsewhere because of our deaf and hard of hearing population. So I'm thinking things like, what are the residence halls like? What are big events like? What is just walking around campus like? So can you two share a little bit about what they might experience when they're on campus?
Well, for example, maybe during a dorm meeting on each different floor, you'll see an interpreter there because some people on the floor meetings are deaf. Or maybe when you go to a class, you'll see a captionist in there. And the captionists are doing their work for somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing. So there are a lot of different ways, a lot of different expressions of things.
And Tim is saying, you know, and also if I could add to that, remember now that RIT has what's called Brick City Festival. It's an event that happens every fall. And that's the chance, you know, it's a family weekend. So everybody comes with a lot of different events. So parents will come oftentimes with their hearing children and they'll notice interpreters spread throughout, captionists spread throughout. And again, that's wonderful for parents to be able to see that RIT is very unique in that way. It's the only college, well, I would say only 2 universities that have a large deaf program in America. RIT, which is very unique and it's very diverse. We have oral deaf students who speak. We have hard of hearing. We have signing deaf students. We have people that are culturally deaf. We have people that we call lowercase d and capital D deaf. Some people that are deaf physically and deaf culturally. So we have the whole range, and families that come to the RIT campus represent that diversity as well, which is beautiful. And it's a very beautiful and enjoyable day. And it's good for parents to really become aware and then afterwards discuss with their children what a special place RIT is with its diversity.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and we know that campus events are going to look differently this year, and hopefully in the future we can get back to a little more of what RIT normal is. But there is something really special about those big events where there's all the interpreters and there's the captioning. And, you know, I think when you're first introduced to RIT, that is something that's so unusual, but then it's just part of our everyday life. And so it's just what you see when you go to campus. And even little things, you know, you might go to a coffee shop and there's a piece of paper there, and that's so that people can communicate if, you know, if somebody doesn't sign or if somebody doesn't speak. And so there's all these unique ways that I think it's so ingrained in our culture. And I'm always excited to share that with parents when they are able to come to campus.
Yes, Tim, and saying just one more important thing. One more really special event is what we call ASL Hockey Night.
Mm.
You know, ASL Hockey Night. And it just packs the arena, everybody's signing. And the one word that everybody learns to sign is Tigers, go Tigers. So we teach that and everybody gets involved in sign language. It's absolutely amazing. It's a very special night where the whole campus community comes together. There's food, there's signing, and people learn how to say, I want a hot dog, I want all the different types of food. They learn the signs for those. It's, you know, it doesn't hurt people to try it just for one night for that big event. And you're right, unfortunately, COVID is going to impact us next year. I mean, this year, but hopefully next year we'll see more of those things again.
Exactly, exactly. And students will still experience a lot of what we've talked about themselves. It's just, as we've been talking about in these other videos, it's just going to look a little bit differently. So can we talk a little bit about how do deaf and hard of hearing students communicate, or how do deaf and hearing students, staff, faculty communicate with one another? You know, Chris was saying, or both of you were saying, that there are so many different ways that our deaf population communicates. So can you talk a little bit about how do we communicate as a community with so many different people and backgrounds and languages and communication styles?
Yes. Well, sometimes we have to use old-fashioned paper and pen. There are many people, though, who use technology to communicate, to get around the communication barriers. People will text with one another, and often that won't be able to solve the problems that they have. Sometimes they'll use instant messaging. Also, I like to use another app Well, actually, I use different. I use Ava, I use MS Translator, but my favorite one is a homegrown one that was made by a deaf person, and it is called, one second, let me look up the exact name. It's called Cardzilla, and that's the one that has very large text and everything. It's very easy for a hearing person to be able to look at it. So I like to use that particular one. Also, that was developed by a deaf individual who helped develop a mobile app for that. And I like that one because it was actually spawned by our deaf community.
Tim, do you have anything else to add about how people communicate at RIT?
You know, it's just what Chris mentioned. I absolutely agree with that. And, you know, everyone tends to have some type of piece of paper. So if a hearing person starts to talk to them, and for example, when a hearing person starts talking, first of all, a deaf person will signify through sign by pointing at their ear that they're deaf, and then they can pull out their piece of paper. But it just kind of signifies that either the deaf person is not able to speak or not able to hear, and they don't want hearing people to necessarily freak out and leave with that. So they often take the lead in saying, hang on, we can use paper, we can use our phone. But they really want those two people to be engaged with each other. And then both in that way can make new friends. And that's really important. So as new friends often become family. So we don't want the deaf and hearing populations to be segregated. We want them to be integrated and engaged with each other, communicating with each other. And that way hearing people become familiar with how to communicate with deaf people by writing, by texting, by using a video phone, for example. And each department on campus will have some types of UBIDO, video. It's a type of machine, you know, and that way it's almost like a teletype machine. There's a lot of different types of devices that are out there. So anyway, they have videos, and RIT is a very special that they have both deaf and hearing individuals communicating. And oftentimes hearing people are a little bit taken back when they're not able to necessarily speak with someone. But we do have the ability to capture speech live. And then, you know, so when first time hearing people get here, they also experience culture shock because they've never realized that they've had to communicate through written paper or things like that. So they afterwards become very appreciative of the deaf culture. And of course they can use the things that they use with everybody, such as email. But when they get together live in person, then we have video, we have text, we have writing back and forth, we have a variety of methods.
Right. And I think the message that I definitely would want parents and incoming students to know is that it's not something to be nervous about. And that, you know, I think what you said, Tim, is there is a culture shock and people might be a little timid at first, but it's really not that hard to communicate, especially our incoming students. They know their phones and they know how to text. So it's pretty easy. And I think everyone on campus is going to learn basic signs, whether they seek it out or not. And so it's pretty quickly they will learn some basics ways to communicate, even just to find out, like, I'm deaf, I'm hearing, okay, we need to pull out that piece of paper. So it's definitely nothing to be nervous about for our incoming students. So I think you've kind of touched on this next question throughout the last questions, but do you two have specific tips for engaging with the deaf community at RIT? I know, for example, one that I was taught right away is if you're walking on a path and there's two people signing, it's okay to walk between them. You don't have to duck around. So that was something that, you know, that little tip that I learned of how to engage with the community while I was there. So do you have other tips like that?
Well, I think it's really good to learn the basics of the alphabet and everything like that, because that provides a real foundation of communication with signs. You know, you don't have to know a full sentence and everything like that. But if you can fingerspell some things, it will help you a lot to just make a beginning. You know, even if you never become an expert at anything, just knowing the alphabet will give you some basic tools to help communicate.
And Tim's saying, for my tip, Chris is absolutely right. Start with the ABCs. That's a great place to start. But learn a little bit more about deaf culture as well. Because deaf culture is, you know, a little bit more, you know, become more sensitive to it, become more understanding. So that way when you encounter a hearing person or deaf culture, for example, if you know I don't have to duck under two deaf people that are walking with each other, develop that. You know, just, you don't have to put your eyes on the ground as you walk by them. Just learn the different cultural sensitivities that are important. You can act like a normal everyday person would act and just walk through. Another good tip is that eye contact is very important for deaf culture. And oftentimes hearing people aren't used to that. They feel like it's staring, but for deaf people, eye contact is so important. And to get someone's attention who is deaf, touch is also important. It is very, very acceptable to tap someone on their shoulder. So, you know, oftentimes, again, if a hearing person wants to get by another hearing person in a crowd, they'll say, "Excuse me." Well, the deaf person can't hear that. But there's just a very gentle tap on the shoulder, which is an important part of deaf culture that alerts the person that you want to get by them. So just learn those tips. The touch that's appropriate for deaf culture, the sensitivity.
Also, if you see somebody at the dorm, whatever, if you push the doorbell and stuff, it'll get their attention by flashing lights in their room instead of using a doorbell. Deaf people are very sensitive to light, and that's typically the way to get their attention. If people are in a room and you want to get the deaf's attention off, if you flash the lights on once or twice, then they'll stop what they're doing and pay attention to what's happening up front.
Those are really good tips, and I think these and other things will be very easily picked up by students just by being on campus and by observing and being a part of the community. But those are really good tips for at least starting, so people understand coming into our community next month what to expect and what to learn. So my last question for you two, Tim actually started, you know, talking before about Tigers. Go Tigers is something that I think most of our student and staff and faculty, that might be their very first sign they learn. But I'm really curious about what the two of you think is the one sign that everybody should know. Besides Go Tigers, we've already covered that. So we need two new signs.
Well, for me, I think it's important to say hello. The way I'm doing it, just that natural hello.
Yes, yes. Or maybe something like good morning.
Right. Right.
Those are perfect first signs to learn, because that's going to be the first thing that you say to somebody when you meet them. So thank you for sharing those. Can you each do them one more time so our families can maybe even learn them? So Tim, can you show what you do for hello?
Hello, right there. See that? Natural gesture, hello.
And Chris, good morning.
Well, the sign for good is, technically it's like this with using both hands. And morning basically is based on the position of the sun in the morning. So if you say, good morning, it's like saying, well, the sun is coming up. And so if you apply the same kind of concept to the afternoon, when the sun is beginning to go down, or for night, when the sun is literally all the way gone. The sun is on the other side of the earth and everything. Those are sort of spatialized signs. But good morning, or good afternoon, or good night, those are three basic signs everybody should know.
Perfect. And that's a great explanation too of a little bit about how ASL works with it's not just the words, it's also the motions symbolize different things. I personally have tried to learn ASL many times and I'm horrible at it, but I keep trying every time. So I appreciate conversations like this where I can watch you and learn and watch the interpreters and hopefully pick up more so I can be a better communicator on campus as well. So I would like to thank both Chris and Tim, as well as our interpreters, Jim and Kathy, for being here today. I think this was a really fun video, and I hope our incoming parents and students, are excited about deaf culture and what they can experience on campus. And to our parents listening, I want to give you my weekly reminder that you can help us prepare for the fall by having your students take that RIT Ready pledge to wash their hands, wear a mask, and watch their distance, and be prepared to do their part to keep our entire community safe this fall. So again, thank you to Chris and Tim and Kathy and Jim, and thank you to all the parents watching, and I'll see you next time.